Yesterday, a piece of theatre took place in the United Nations, and theatre which could have meaning in the next few days, in the next few weeks, in the next few months. And the theatre was large. You would think the theatre would be the vote. 143 members of the United Nations voted for Palestine to be recognized as a country. Not sure at the moment who would be the leader of that country, Fatah, Hamas, or Mr. Abbas. 9 people voted against and 25 people abstained. But the theatre was the Israeli ambassador to the UN, who stood at the podium and had this little shredder machine and made a very impassioned speech, apparently without notes, and he referred to the UN Charter, which he then shredded in front of the assembly. And he said that you, by voting in this way, you are shredding the UN Charter. Shame on you. Shame on you for voting to endorse or to reward terrorism. And the UN has guaranteed peace in the West, has guaranteed equal values in the West, has moved away from colonialism and has cemented some sort of order, at least for the West. For the rest of the world, no, I don't think that's the case, and the West has certainly exploited a number of countries and has exploited this peace, which has lasted 70-odd years. Maybe this is completely fracturing now. But for the ambassador, the vote to recognize the state of Palestine is to give a state to a group of mass murderers, to the Hitlers of our time. He talks about the possibility of President Sinwar taking on power as the leader of Hamas with gratitude to the UN, a terrorist diplomat whose stated goal is Jewish genocide. And this, he says, is the new moral standard. Of course, it's hyperbole. And of course, the vote itself was simply advice to the Security Council. Only the Security Council can recognize another nation, can create a state. But it created a state in 1948 of Israel. And although the ambassador is censorious about the idea of rewarding the 7th of October Hamas terrorist event with a recognition of the statehood of Palestine, both the West Bank and Gaza, putting this into perspective, one's got to recognize that the state of Israel was equally built on a terrorist campaign, a series of terrorist campaigns, and that one of the early leaders of Israel, Menachem Begin, was directly involved in the terrorist bombing of the King David Hotel. So I don't think that that one can take a sort of an entirely high-minded approach to this vote, and side with the ambassador and sneer at the contempt for moral standards and say, we don't negotiate with terrorists. The reality is we do negotiate with terrorists. The reality is that that terrorism has effectively been rewarded as well, or terrorism has been ignored. Because in the end, it's not terrorism which drives the impulse towards recognizing the state. It's the fact that there is a state identity already. And there is. There is an identity of Palestine, and it speaks loudly. Palestine already has observer status in the United Nations. To take that further is the right thing to do, and to recognize a two-state solution, if Israel will not help to promote that, is exactly the job of the United Nations. The Israeli ambassador is simply employing invective and very clever staging to make a point that ignores the history of his own country. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that Israel was built entirely on terrorism. It wasn't. It was built on an identity which was clearly evident. And the United Nations was simply recognizing what was a fact, despite the efforts of the British mandate to stop it. And the same thing is true now. The United Nations is recognizing what is a fact, despite the efforts of the Netanyahu government to stop it. The fact equally that there's been a major terrorist event, a hideous terrorist event, is an irrelevance to the decision of the United Nations. The United Nations should have taken this decision long ago. As for the possibility of Hamas taking on the presidency of Gaza and of Palestine, I think that should, of course, be resisted. But and I don't think that terrorism should be rewarded. Recognizing a state is not rewarding terrorism. Recognizing a state is rewarding. And there's just a point where you can't stick your head in the sand any longer. I hope this will push forward the two-state solution, and I hope the United Nations General Security Council acts as fast as it possibly can.